Welcome back to our channel. Have you ever felt a memory? Not just recalled it, but truly felt it, like a phantom warmth on your skin or the echo of a sound that isn't really there. For millions of people, that phantom echo sounds a lot like laughter. It's a specific kind of laughter. Not a sharp, cynical chuckle, but a deep, rolling, corn-fed belly laugh. The kind that makes your shoulders shake. It's the sound of a barbershop quartet hitting a sour note on purpose. It's the sound of a nonsensical punchline to a Shaggy Dog story. It's the sound of Hee Haw. And for over 2 decades, the maestro of that laughter, the man at the very heart of that joyful noise, was a gentle soul from the hills of East Tennessee named Archie Campbell. This isn't just the story of a comedian. It's a story about the changing soul of a country, about the shifting sands of fame, and about the quiet dignity of a man who brought a universe of laughter to the world, only to face his final curtain call in a near-deafening silence. This is the story of the man who gave the Opry its chuckle, and the quiet tragedy of being left behind by the very culture he helped define. To understand Archie Campbell, you first have to understand the world that made him. Bulls Gap, Tennessee, in 1914, was not a place of grand ambition. It was a place of deep roots, tucked into the rolling foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Life was governed by the seasons, the church, and the front porch. This was a pocket of America where storytelling wasn't a pastime. It was a currency. Humor wasn't a performance. It was a survival tool. The mountain wit that Archie would one day make famous was forged here, in the general stores and the church socials, where a clever turn of phrase or a self-deprecating joke could lighten the load of a hard life. The air itself seemed to carry music. The old ballads brought over from Scotland and Ireland had mutated in the mountain hollows, telling new stories of love, loss, and life in the coal mines and on the tenant farms. This was the primordial soup of country music, and Archie grew up breathing it in. He learned to play the guitar not from formal lessons, but from watching and listening, absorbing the rhythms and melodies that were as much a part of the landscape as the dogwood trees. This era, the early 20th century, was a time of immense technological change, but it arrived slowly in places like Bulls Gap. The advent of the radio was nothing short of miraculous. It was a magic box that piped in voices and music from a world away from the magical stage of the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. For a young boy with a creative spark, hearing performers like Uncle Dave Macon, the Dixie Dewdrop, mixing banjo licks with tall tales and country comedy was a revelation. It wasn't just music, it was personality, it was character, it was a connection. It planted a seed in young Archie's mind. A man could make a living from his wits and his voice. Before he could chase that dream, however, the world intervened. Archie came of age during the Great Depression, a time that reinforced the value of a good laugh in the face of hardship. Then came the Second World War. Archie, then in his late 20s, served his country not on the battlefield, but in the United States Navy. While details of his specific service are modest, as was the man himself, this period was formative. It took him out of the familiar hills of Tennessee and exposed him to a wider cross-section of America. It was an experience that broadened his perspective and, no doubt, his repository of human observation, the raw material for any great comedian. After the war, he returned to Tennessee, a married man now, having wed the love of his life, Mary, and with a renewed determination to make his mark not as a soldier, but as an entertainer. His first major break came not in the glittering capital of Nashville, but in the regional hub of Knoxville. W&Ox Radio was a powerhouse in East Tennessee, and its lunchtime show, The Midday Merry-Go-Round, was a legendary incubator of talent. This wasn't just some amateur hour. It was a professional crucible where the next generation of country stars was forged. It was here that Archie Campbell truly came into his own. He worked alongside a staggering array of future legends. A young, impossibly talented guitarist named Chet Atkins was there, developing his revolutionary finger-picking style. The Carter sisters, including a fiery young June Carter, were regulars. Carl Smith, who would become a honky-tonk hero, honed his craft on that very stage. Archie wasn't just another singer. He was the show's indispensable utility man. He could sing a sweet ballad, play rhythm guitar, and then, in the next breath, transform into a cornball character that would have the studio audience in stitches. It was here he began to develop his famous comedic routines, like the spoonerism-filled stories of Grandpappy or his banter with other performers. He learned the critical art of timing, of how to hold a pause for a beat too long, of how to use a simple facial expression to sell a joke. The midday merry-go-round was his university, and he graduated with honors, becoming one of the most popular personalities in the entire region. His success was so significant that he eventually bought a local radio station and a television station in Knoxville, becoming a bona fide media mogul in his own right. But the ultimate prize still lay 180 miles down the road, Nashville. Joining the Grand Ole Opry in the 1950s was the country music equivalent of being called up to the major leagues. The Opry, broadcast from the historic Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, was the genre's sacred institution. To be invited to become a member was to be accepted into the royal family. In 1956, Archie Campbell got the call. When he stepped onto that hallowed stage for the first time as a member, he was joining a pantheon that included giants like Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and a fiery young man named Johnny Cash. But Archie brought something unique. While comedy had always been a part of the Opry, Archie professionalized it. He presented his humor in crafted, repeatable routines that were as polished as any musical performance. He had his characters, his catchphrases, and his signature stories. He introduced his Dr. Campbell We routine, a back-and-forth bit, where he played both the patient and the quack doctor, a masterpiece of vocal dexterity and comedic timing. He also became known for his spoken-word parodies of popular country songs, taking a dramatic, heart-wrenching ballad and retelling it from a comically mundane perspective. His most famous was a take on Claude King's Wolverton Mountain, where he told the story of his own failed attempt to court the daughter of the mountain man, ending not in romantic triumph, but in a hasty retreat. The audience adored it. He wasn't just a singer who told jokes. He was a comedian who could sing beautifully, a storyteller who used music as his punctuation. He signed with RCA Victor, one of the biggest labels in the world, and released a string of successful comedy and music albums, solidifying his status as a pillar of the Nashville establishment. As the 1960s wore on, however, America was changing. The culture was fracturing along a fault line that ran right between the city and the country. Television, dominated by three major networks based in New York and Los Angeles, increasingly catered to a younger, more urban, more sophisticated audience. Rural America, the so-called flyover country, felt increasingly invisible, even mocked by the coastal elites who programmed what they watched. It was in this climate that two Canadian television producers, Frank Pepiat and John Aylesworth, had a radical idea. They had been successful writers for variety shows, but they saw an untapped market. What if they created a show that didn't run from rural stereotypes but leaned into them? What if they made a country version of the fast-paced, blackout sketch comedy of a show like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. The concept was pitched to CBS, and to the surprise of many in the industry, the network greenlit it. They called it Hee Haw. To anchor this strange new vessel, they needed two captains. They found them in a pair of charismatic world-class musicians, the California cool guitarist Buck Owens and the affable banjo-picking virtuoso Roy Clark. But they also needed a third pillar, someone who represented the authentic, homespun humor of the Nashville tradition. They needed Archie Campbell. Just as this incredible opportunity was landing in his lap, however, Archie's life almost came to an end. In 1968, he suffered a massive, debilitating heart attack. It was a severe health crisis that put everything on hold. For a man whose entire career was built on an energetic, larger-than-life stage presence, it was a terrifying brush with mortality. He faced a grueling recovery, but with the support of his wife Mary and his family, he slowly regained his strength. The experience seemed to imbue him with a deeper appreciation for life and a renewed focus on what mattered most, his family and his craft. So when the call came to join the cast of Hee Haw, he didn't hesitate. He saw it not just as a job, but as a second chance. Premiering in the summer of 1969, Hee Haw was an immediate, astonishing, and somewhat baffling success. Critics were aghast. They called it mindless, unsophisticated, and a bucolic vaudeville. But audiences, especially those in the South and Midwest, loved it. It felt like a show made for them, by them. It was a fantasy version of the country, set in the mythical Kornfield Kounty, where the women were beautiful, the men were harmlessly oafish, and every problem could be solved with a song or a joke. And Archie Campbell was its comedic soul. He was everywhere. He presided over Archie's barbershop, where he'd drape a sheet over a fellow cast member and proceed to tell a long, rambling story, full of spoonerisms and malapropisms, all while cutting their hair with comically oversized scissors. He partnered with Gordy Tapp for the musical bit "Fty You Was Gone," a song about a fleeting love, punctuated by that iconic raspberry blowing sound effect. He was the straight man, the punchline deliverer, the wise old sage, and the village idiot, sometimes all in the same episode. His warmth and genuine likability provided the show's emotional anchor. While Buck and Roy were the cool, musical hosts, Archie was the show's funny uncle. The show was a machine. The cast would fly to Nashville for 2 intense 2-week taping sessions a year, filming an entire season's worth of material in a whirlwind of costume changes and line readings. The atmosphere on set was famously convivial. It was a reunion of old friends from the Opry and the country music circuit. Everyone, from superstars like Loretta Lynn and Tammy Wynette to character actors and comedians, was treated like family. Archie, with his calm demeanor and professional work ethic, was a beloved leader on set. He was always prepared, always ready with a quiet word of encouragement, and of course always ready with a joke to break the tension of a long day of filming. But even as Hee Haw dominated the ratings, a storm was brewing at the corporate level of CBS. In 1971, in a now infamous programming decision known as the Rural Purge, the network abruptly canceled all of its highly rated but rurally oriented shows. The Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Mayberry RFD, and Hee Haw were all axed in one fell swoop. The network wanted to attract a wealthier, more urban demographic for its advertisers, and the cornpone humor of Kornfield Kounty didn't fit the new corporate image. For most shows, that would have been the end. But Hee Haw was different. Its producers immediately took the show into first-run syndication, selling it directly to local stations across the country. The result was a stunning rebuke to the network executives in New York. Freed from the constraints of a major network, Hee Haw became even more popular, running for another 22 years and becoming one of the longest-running and most successful syndicated programs in American television history. This success, however, came with a constant companion: controversy. From its inception, Hee Haw was criticized for perpetuating negative hillbilly stereotypes. The Bieb overalls, the missing teeth, the jokes about moonshine and lazy hound dogs. Critics argued that it presented a demeaning caricature of Southern and rural people. It was a charge that stung the cast, who saw themselves not as mocking their culture, but celebrating it. Archie himself rarely spoke publicly about the controversy, but his entire career was an unspoken rebuttal. His humor was never mean-spirited. It was gentle, self-deprecating, and based on universal human foibles. The characters he played were foolish, but they were never hateful. They were absurd, but they were also endearing. In Archie's worldview, laughing at yourself was a sign of strength, not weakness. The show, in his eyes, was a loving parody, an inside joke shared with millions. Furthermore, it provided a national stage for dozens of supremely talented country musicians, instrumentalists, and singers who would have been utterly ignored by mainstream pop culture. For every corny joke, there was a breathtaking musical performance by Chet Atkins, Roy Clark, or a guest like Johnny Cash. Hee Haw was a Trojan horse, smuggling authentic country artistry into American living rooms under the guise of slapstick comedy. But time is a relentless current, and by the mid-1980s, the cultural tide was turning again. The very definition of comedy was changing. The observational, often cynical and political humor of stand-up comedians who came out of clubs like the Comedy Store was now the gold standard. The gentle, character-based storytelling of Archie Campbell began to feel quaint, a relic from a bygone era. Country music was changing too. The urban cowboy movement had sanded off the rough edges of the genre, replacing fiddles and steel guitars with string sections and pop production. A new generation of slicker, more image-conscious stars was taking over Nashville. The folksy authenticity that Archie represented was no longer in vogue. Though Hee Haw was still on the air, and he was still a beloved member of the Grand Ole Opry, Archie could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The phone didn't ring as often for television guest spots or major concert tours. He was a legend, yes, but a legend in a world that seemed to be rapidly passing him by. He continued to perform at the Opry every chance he got, his commitment to the institution absolute. That stage was his home, and the Opry family was his family. But for a man who had been at the pinnacle of television stardom, it was a quieter existence. There's a profoundly humanizing, rarely told story from these later years. Archie was an accomplished amateur painter. He had studied art as a young man and found great solace in it throughout his life. He often painted landscapes of the Smoky Mountains, scenes from his childhood, and portraits. In his later years, he opened a small art gallery and gift shop near the Opryland theme park. He would often just sit there himself, quietly working on a new painting. Fans would wander in, sometimes not even recognizing the calm, unassuming man with the paintbrush as the television icon. He would chat with them, not as Archie Campbell the star, but as Archie Campbell the painter from Bulls Gap. He talked to them about light and color and the beauty of the Tennessee hills. These quiet moments, away from the applause and the studio lights, seemed to bring him a deep sense of peace. It was a connection to his roots, to a part of himself that had nothing to do with fame or punchlines. In August of 1987, Archie Campbell passed away from complications of the heart, issues that had plagued him for nearly 2 decades. He was 72 years old. His death was noted in the press, of course, but it didn't command the kind of wall-to-wall coverage that a star of his magnitude might have received just 10 years earlier. His funeral was a deeply Nashville affair, attended by his Opry family and the friends who knew the man behind the laughter. Roy Clark served as a pallbearer, his face etched with a grief that spoke volumes about their long friendship. It was a heartfelt farewell from the community that loved him, but to the wider world it felt like a quiet closing chapter on a book that many had already put back on the shelf. So we are left with the echo of laughter, and the echo of a profound silence. Archie Campbell's story is a powerful meditation on the nature of legacy. What does it mean to be remembered? His brand of humor, once a cultural touchstone, now exists mostly in the amber of YouTube clips and nostalgia-filled DVD box sets. He has no modern equivalent. The cultural space he occupied, the nationally beloved country comedian, has simply ceased to exist. His significance, then, is not measured by his current Q rating or his social media footprint. It is measured in the joy he created in his time. He was a healer who used laughter as his medicine during a fractured and contentious period in American history. He was a preservationist who, through his characters and stories, kept a certain kind of American folklore alive. He was a quiet professional who showed up, did his job with grace and kindness, and treated everyone with respect, from the network president to the stagehand. In the end, the most poignant truth about Archie Campbell is the stark contrast between his public persona and his private reality. He was the king of corn, the purveyor of a loud, boisterous, unapologetic brand of country humor. But the man himself was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply sensitive. He was a man who brought ting koi to millions, who stood in the brightest of spotlights, and who ultimately found his truest self in the quiet solitude of a painter's easel, capturing the timeless beauty of the mountains that had always been his home. His life wasn't a joke with a punchline. It was a long, beautifully told story full of warmth, complexity, and a profound, lingering grace. He may have died in a world that was beginning to forget him, but for anyone who takes the time to listen, the laughter, that deep, rolling, honest laughter, is still there, and it sounds as sweet as ever. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching,